Good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting contact. Alright, got a few pretty significant things to do today on this to start tightening up the detail and fixing the composition. Firstly, I've drawn in a circle here for a purple moon and a circle here for a red sun, and I've mixed up some darkish Payne's gray into some gold for a shadow on the foreground cloud here, a little bit of gold for the background cloud, or for the middle ground cloud, and then some 3 yellows. The lightest will be sort of the outermost aura of petals. The medium yellow, light yellow will be the next layer in, and then a pure yellow to start fixing up some of the outer layer petals. And then what else do we got mixed up in doing for this? Then a little bit more bright orange for the lake of fire, a lighter orange than is already on it. And that's about it. So we're going to get that done, and hopefully it won't take too crazy long, and we can get it done in a session or two. Zoom that into about right there. Okay, here we go.
And we don't want to, Dodger Stadium filled or anything like that. It's very good to atomize it and spread it through. Now, the other thing is, I advocate plant hallucinogens. And people always say, well, what about LSD? I mean, didn't LSD change your life? Didn't it change all our lives? Why aren't you into LSD? And the answer is certainly yes and yes. The reason I'm not into LSD is not having to do with the effects of LSD, which I think are marvelous, but with the fact that a couple of enterprising second-year biochemistry students can produce 6 or 7 million hits in a long weekend. 6 or 7 million hits with an illegal drug. Suddenly, this is the realm of governments and criminal syndicates and revolutionary disruption of population. My brother and I wrote psilocybin, the Magic Mushroom Grower's Guide. If you work like a dog for 6 months, maybe you can produce 2,000 or 3,000 hits. So that's the thing. LSD had chemical qualities that made it terrifying to the government. I mean, anybody with $50,000 worth of backing and 2 years of biochemistry could turn themselves into a major threat to political stability in this country. So they slammed that. They're not going to put up with that. The thing I love about the mushrooms is, if you're a dedicated mushroom grower, you produce this piddling amount, and if they come and drag you away because it is illegal, all they get is you. No syndicate collapses, no pyramid disappears. So it's invasive and low-key and slowly spreading. The other thing is, mushrooms are, this is a cultural thing, mushrooms are inherently non-threatening. They're absurd. They're what we put decals of on serving trays, and bath towels bear mushrooms on them. It's a kind of silly thing, and so I think that they don't really understand what a powerful hallucinogen this is. Well, that's enough on why I'm not in the can. This woman, yeah. Absolutely, if we could do it. I mean, I'm not yet convinced, see? I mean, you've got your gurus, but if you ever get close to any of these people in these guru scenes, close enough where you can just say to them, look, level with me. Is this stuff as good as 5 grams in silent darkness? And they say, are you serious? The other possibility is technology on 2 fronts, mind machines. The problem with mind machines is, you know, you have to smoke a bomber to put up with it with more than 10 minutes. I mean, you quickly satisfy yourself that this can't possibly be it, because it is light, but it is contentless. Well, the psychedelic experience is all content. The other possibility, and I put in some time in this beat, is virtual reality. And I have more hope for virtual reality, because virtual reality is a technology for that would allow us to show each other the inside of our heads, our dreams, our vision. And I think that sufficiently perfected, it might have the consequences of these psychedelics. The problem is it carries a huge amount of negative freight. You know that it's not going to be a tool for us to show each other the inside of our minds. It's going to be a tool to sell us crap that we don't want. It's going to be a tool for yet more realistic, vicarious, and gratuitous violence. It's going to be a tool for more pornographic degradation of women. So it seems to me, while it holds out the possibility of a technically driven psychedelic, it has a lot of negative freight. I agree with your premise, but I'm driven by a tremendous sense of urgency. I mean, why try to create a technical alternative to psilocybin when you've got psilocybin?
I think that people should use mushrooms as respect. And once you get there, you try and keep going without that tool. I mean, because what we totally want, I mean, we want to transcend this plane. We want to be on a higher plane. And it's awareness that you're not going to get to that plane ultimately if you have to keep coming back into the plane to get out of the plane again.
Well, how about this? Maybe there's something wrong with that metaphor, because notice it has to do with planes and transitions. It's an inherently dualist metaphor.
This concludes tape 1. Our program continues with tape 2.
Alright, so that gets a sun and a moon set in. Now I'm going to move on to cloud shadows before I start with the sunflower thing.
There is no inside and outside. There is no with or without. You just use what you've got. Whatever works should be used. I spent time in India and visited all these people and so forth and so on, and I just became convinced that unless you were predisposed to believe in this stuff, that it would never carry you where you wanted it to. And one thing about psychedelics, you don't have to be predisposed. It doesn't work for those who believe it works. It works for those who think it doesn't work. Then one last point, and then we'll go on. There's a story, maybe some of you know this story, of a man who lived by the side of a river, and he wanted to cross the river. So he practiced a siddhi of levitation so that he could walk across the water. And it took him 40 years to perfect this siddhi, and finally he could cross the river. And Buddha was preaching in the neighborhood, and the guy came to him and he said, Master, look what I've achieved. I can walk on the water to cross the river. And Buddha said, yeah, but the ferry costs a nickel. And that's the thing. I think we're not going to be able to replace this tool without wasting so much time in the act of replacing it that Armageddon will catch up with us. I think we have to humble ourselves so thoroughly that you have to admit that you can't get where you want to go unless you form a partnership with somebody whose idea of a good time is growing in a cow pond. And if you're willing to partner up with this humble member of the ecosystem, then you and it can fly to glory. Have at it. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend, especially in the late stages of pregnancy, doing anything that is going to wildly perturb you. And you know, LSD was discovered in the act of trying to produce better drugs to induce labor. So that's excellent advice. Honor the fetus. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the true and honest answer is, how the hell can you find out when they won't let you do research? It's totally insidious. We don't know. We don't know because they will not allow the research to be done. This is one of the reasons why I say that you should stick with shamanically sanctioned plants. Because we know, for instance, that people have been taking psilocybin in the Sierra Mazateca of central Mexico for millennia. They don't show blindness, tumors, miscarriage, madness, cataracts, whatever. That's your human data for that. But you go to, let's talk for a minute about something like ketamine. Nobody knows. Nobody has any data. MDMA seems to be tremendously effective in facilitating interpersonal stuff. That's a psychological issue. Chemically, what kind of data do we have? 6 years worth of data gathered under duress. So to be safe, stick with the things that are sanctioned by human use. And then in some more enlightened future, we will explore these synthetics and find out just what the parameters are. Yeah, finish up. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying take things which have been sanctioned by human usage. I mean, how about a plant like Strychnos noxavomica? I mean, you're dead in a minute and a half. And it's a beautiful, wonderful plant. Why did it kill you? Well, because it's jammed with strychnine. No, it's nothing about its being a plant. It's about having a repeated history of human usage. That's what sanctifies it. Yeah, the lady in magenta.
Now, let's hit this cloud.
That's really an interesting point. I mean, it never occurred to me, but somebody brought it up to me. They said, have you noticed that the trips are changing? And once you do ask yourself this question, it does seem to be so. And I don't know whether that's a deep assertion. I'm not sure exactly what's going on there. For instance, this goddess thing, I don't think people gave the goddess a thought in the early 1970s, late 1960s. Now, people have some of the least likely people report intense encounters with the God. So is it amplifying the general mindset of the society, and so there's more goddess stuff there? Or I don't really know. It's a very interesting question. There are more questions than answers. I mean, this is definitely wide open stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, use psychedelics as a sort of like an antidote to that. But I have trouble seeing a cause-and-effect relationship as far as what are you or all life person might lead to in terms of
We're trying to restore the relationship of ego to the other components of the psyche that existed as recently as 12,000 years ago. The ego has become a deadly growth in the historical societies, exacerbated by the phonetic alphabet, monotheism, modern science. This is like you're getting sicker and sicker and sicker as you lay these things on. And so the idea is that if we could restore the original diminished role of the ego that it had for that period, however long it was, that we could begin to solve our problems. Because the problems which face us, put very simply, are going to demand sacrifice. And sacrifice is what the ego doesn't want to hear about. And when you go to somebody and say, look, to save this planet, we're going to have to redistribute income radically. That means everybody in this room is going to have less. We're going to have to honor a whole bunch of cultural positions that we previously just were going to bulldoze over.
I think I'm going to change the aim a little bit.
So
Try and keep it.
it's the diminishing of ego by any means necessary, but lies to
Get the sunflower in the middle.
on our problem. I mean, if we continue as we are, I think we have probably less than 30 years before life is irreconcilably screwed up. You know, nobody believes that the future is rosy and wonderful. I mean, if you go to the people at the World Bank and the IMF, and these people who are straight, suits, all of them, they have a set of curves which would stand your hair on end. When they propagate the curve of population, the curve of toxification of the environment, the curve related to the ozone hole disappearing, you see, it's finished in sometime in the next 50 years. They don't talk about this because they don't want to panic the vast numbers of people who just go to work and raise their kids and pray somebody smarter is doing something about all this. But they don't believe there is any kind of normal future. And I don't either. I think that it's business as usual is not on the menu, folks. We're either going to go into an era of immense resource scarcity, regimentation, governmental interference in our lives, tremendous propagandistic efforts to make us do one thing or another, or we're going to pull the plug on scientism and its stooges and the institutions which feed it. Capitalism is an interesting problem, more easily discussed now that communism is out of the picture. Capitalism is as anti-human a philosophy as you can possibly conceive. Because at this very moment, we should be consuming less, manufacturing less, selling less, transporting less. And what's the battle cry? Free trade everywhere. What does free trade mean? It means my right to come to your country and sell the most outlandish junk you've ever seen, and you will have no right to turn it away, because in the name of free trade, crapola has to go everywhere. It's really, Steve, they try to tell you that that capitalism and democracy are not at variance. Actually, the whole Marxist-Leninist socialist thing was a side dish. The real life and death struggle is between capitalism and democracy. Democracy says everybody has an innate worth that must be honored. Capitalism says those who die with the most toys win. You cannot reconcile these two things. And nobody wants to talk about this. We're still having the party over the fall of communism. But, you know, you go to the Soviet Union or the former areas of the Soviet Union and you see that what it was a deep freeze for traditional culture. In Kyrgyzia and Turkmenistan, people are basically camel husbandry is what's going on. Now, with communism on the rocks, McDonald's will be there in 5 years, and Kmart will be following close behind. So I think we're coming to a great crisis of fundamental, our relation to our own fundamental institutions. I'm not anti-capitalist. I think capitalism needs to sever its connection to materialism. This is, again, why virtual reality is interesting. You sell things made of light, not made of beryllium, metal, brass, steel, and wood, but light. We've got all the light we need, but we have to stop making things out of stuff, or we're not going to be around to tell the tale. Yeah.
A way to shift our values is maybe political side. I don't disagree with it. But your model has been that everybody in the culture participated in this and were able to shift their values simultaneously because they cooperate. Are you suggesting, is that the necessary outcome in this case?
No, I think that, you know, revolutions are made by percentages. If 15 or 20% change, then the example would spread. You see, we are not, psilocybin is the easy way to awaken. You know, take a psychedelic plant and have an experience and get your act together. But the future is full of sledgehammers. It's not going to end with a whimper. It's going to end with a series of thuds and bangs. It could begin almost any time. I mean, we could get a hot, muggy day in Mexico City this summer, and 1 million people would die. This thing in Los Angeles is a wake-up call. It is going to get uglier and more chaotic and more crazy. There is going to be more starvation, more fascism, more dictatorship. Unless we do something, until we do something. And how bad is it going to have to get before people say, you know, we're doing something wrong? You know, people dance on the Russians, but you've got to admire people who have the guts to say, we did it entirely wrong, 100%. I mean, can you imagine in this country to being able to say, you know, I mean, it may be coming. It may be coming. This character from Austin is a peculiar item in the mix. You know, I mean, I for years had a fantasy speech, which I always imagined that I would somehow end up giving, but it's the speech where you say, my fellow Americans, you have been lied to, screwed and abused by these two criminal parties for 100 years. And your only hope is to overthrow the Republicrats and create a decent world to live in. Well, no Republican can make that speech. No Democrat can make that speech and be credible. It has to be somebody who wasn't in bed with either of those forces. So I'm not at all pleased by who apparently will bear the mantle. But on the other hand, if change is what we need, then it's probably not going to be a candidate that you and I can embrace. It's going to be some oddball. So, you know, we have to recognize it when we see it coming. Yeah.
Couple things. First of all, it seems to me, when it contemplates the spatial and temporal context, just put this experience, you have to realize what the functions are that go into that. You don't even know what it is.
No, we don't know what it is.
Try to place it into a temporal spatial mode. And it seems to me it serves us better to leave the question open and have the experience, so let the experience know what it's about and what it is about.
Yeah, the great thing about it is it can talk.
Secondly, I have asked a question about time with zero.
Good for you.
When I first saw it,
Inside.
made exactly that way. And I was fascinated by it. And I watched it closely, but I hadn't gotten to the case when I started getting interested in what the significance of the zero problem was. The case stopped. So I'd like to, I mean, it seems to be a because the zero problem had some singular significance, but I really wonder what
It's going to take another session.
the zero problem.
I'm going to cut it here and pick up with another take.
Idea what this question
Take two.
is about. I've stayed away from this because this is the personalistic stuff where I've created a certain model of reality based on a new way of looking at time. And I don't want to go into it too much tonight, but I want to suggest something to you tonight, which is that, you know, at the very beginning of this talk, we talked about mutation and natural selection, and that the Darwin's insight was vast and deep. And what he offered was an explanation for how rainbow trout come to be, monarch butterflies, redwood trees, herds of elephants, so forth and so on. What it doesn't address is us. We are the weird bird on the block. I mean, yes, we're some kind of monkey, but when you stand us next to our nearest relative, it's very, very clear that it is not a very near relative. It doesn't look like us much, certainly doesn't act like us. What's the deal with human beings? And I think that, you know how all these religions, these Western religions, have built in this idea of the end of the world, and they're always running around expecting the Messiah or something. And this, to the scientific mind, is just the final proof of the pudding that these people have watered between the years. Because science just says, you know, that's just ridiculous. I mean, but I wonder, I mentioned just a minute ago these curves that when you propagate them into the future, everything leads to the unimaginable, and it's all within the next 50 years. So I sort of think as human beings as analogous to iron filings on a piece of paper. And you shake these iron filings out of a salt shaker or something, and there they lie, randomly arranged in heaps. Well, then you come underneath the paper with a very powerful magnet, and lo and behold, these little iron filings coherently arrange themselves into this beautiful double mustache pattern, which I'm sure you've all seen. Well, I think that there is an enormous punchline to the historical process that very, very few people suspect, and that what history is, it's what happens to an animal who falls under the influence of a kind of strange attractor, and that we are being pulled into a well of transformative intentionality. History is not pushed by the casuistry of war, migration, imperial dynastic families and stuff like that. History is pulled toward an unimaginable something which is continuously trying to mirror itself in us. This is why these Egyptians say, you know, I don't know what it is, but I just think we should really build a big, simple building. They say, I don't know why, but I'm going to enslave 50,000 people and do it, and don't ask me why. And this is the same force that reared Chartres Cathedral. This is the same force that created the space shuttle. We are in a relationship to an unseen something which we keep trying to image with our mythologies, our religions, our technologies, our epiphanies. And I think that it's not so far away, that it isn't 10,000 years in the future. It is sometime in the next 50 years. And that this is what history was for. You see, history is an incredibly peculiar and brief phenomenon. I mean, viewed from the point of view of biology, it's less time than it takes for a new species to emerge. I mean, let's call history 25,000 years. You know, in frame 1, you're chipping flint. In frame 2, you're hurling an instrument toward Alpha Centauri. Like that, this happened. Well, what's happening? It's that mind itself is being pulled out of this creature, and it's being given hands and languages and symbolic systems in order to image the unspeakable. The unspeakable, I call it the transcendental object at the end of time. It casts, it's in another dimension. It's in a kind of superspace. And what it casts into history is the enormous shadow of its immanence. This is what straight people call God. This is what all these visionaries are raving about. It's that when you sink beneath the surface of ordinary causality and mundane ho-humism, what you discover is this enormous transcendental object, which you could call it, you know, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, or the flying saucer, or the Philosopher's Stone. It's all of those things, and much, much more. It's not only stranger than you suppose, it's stranger than you can suppose. And it has called us out of animal organization over a 25,000 year period. We hang in the balance, and then we meet it. And we're going to meet it. That's the light at the end of that birth canal of transcendence that I referred to. And now I see that our song is sung, our time is done. Thank you very, very much for turning in. It's worth taking the time for everybody to just make a very brief, very, very brief statement about, you don't have to say who you are if you don't want to, but you can say what you're hoping for, or why you're here, or what your agenda is, just so that if it turns out we're 80% shrinks, or, you know, 80% ceramicists or something, then we turn it that way. And those of you who are undercover, please stay undercover so you don't alarm anybody. Especially me, right? So why don't we just start and go across in some reasonably logical fashion, which, yeah. Well, that tells you what you're worth, doesn't it? Oh, true. No, let's not record it so people... And also, I had at one point thought I would be an art historian. That was one of my real obsessions. So I had enough art history to be trained in, you know, recognizing the evolution of motif, how one artist passes on techniques and conceits to his students or his imitators, and all this art historical stuff. And I also had been very interested in Jung. And none of this seemed to explain the content of the psychedelic experience. I would get in there and say, well, how come I'm not seeing A, archetypes, and B, things which somebody else, I don't know, Dali, Ensor, Caravaggio, Bosch, somebody should have seen this stuff and gotten it down. And there didn't seem to be a trail through the history of Western art of the presence of this dimension. So then I thought, wow, is it that nobody knew about all this? I mean, Bosch would have given his right arm for a sheet of blotter, I would think. So it became for me like a mystery. Where is this stuff coming from, and what does it say about our humanness? Yeah.
I'm glad that Boston took somewhat of anything right up in the time. It was experimenting with it.
Well, there's a lot of ink spilled over Bosch because he is such a startlingly radical painter in the context of his time. Many of his conceits were picked up after his life. Peter Bruegel the Elder being the foremost exponent of it. He may have been an alchemical guinea pig. Fraser, I think, wrote a book called The Millennium of Hieronymus Bosch, in which he wanted to suggest that maybe Datura use, that there was a cult called the Brotherhood of the Free Spirit, which practiced ritual nudity, which begins to sound something like the orgies we talked about last night. It was a cult of printers, and it may be that the Garden of Earthly Delights was actually painted as an altarpiece for a congregation of the Brotherhood of the Free Spirit. But this is all pretty murky stuff. It's hard to get back to Bosch. He didn't leave any written records. We have his birth is recorded in the parish church, where is the village where he was born. We know he was born sometime around 1450, died in 1516, but the details are pretty murky. Well, not to belabor Bosch. So what I thought would be a reasonable way to do this morning is to take the most extreme psychedelic case and experience and describe it and talk about it a little, and then see what issues that raises. Because my experience with this stuff has led me to the conclusion that in a way, it's to be thought of, this other dimension, is to be thought of like a mandala. And different psychedelic compounds and generously different kinds of yoga and different kinds of techniques of all sorts land you in different parts of this mandala. But that what you're always trying to do is get to the center of the mandala. And it's simply my bias, my opinion, but I think the center of the mandala is probably the DMT experience for a number of reasons. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk about it this morning. First, let me talk about it physically. DMT is an indole hallucinogen, a tryptamine, and it's produced endogenously in the human brain. This is very interesting. Very few psychedelic compounds are produced in the human brain. We don't know what
that is
DMT
part
is
2
doing
of
there.
Gabor Mate, when the body says no, the hidden cost of stress. Hopefully I'll be able to get away with it. It's the complete audio book. Yesterday I posted the complete audio book of Rick Strassman's The Spirit Molecule in 2 parts, both in my Rick Strassman playlist, and Gabor's hopefully will be on Gabor's playlist later today. But I'm going to pause that there to go tend to my video production and then pick this up with another take. Alright, next take.
DMT, and one of the things that has caused me to think that it might have a role in the chemistry of dreaming is that one of the frustrating things about it is you have this experience without
Mate
doubt
Part
the
1
most
and 2.
bizarre, appalling, peculiar
When the body
experience you
says
could
no
possibly have. That's
is
at
processing
minute
on
2.
YouTube.
At minute
It
5,
hasn't run its
you're
copyright check yet,
raving about it.
so it may never
At
air.
minute 7,
We'll see
you
though.
can't remember it.
Still got to process for
And so
another half
it's
an hour.
literally like gold running through your fingers.
So I'm going to go ahead
You
and
say,
do
"Yeah, this is the
my
most
cam on
amazing
this for
thing.
now.
This is the most amazing thing.
Well, that
This
does
is-
its thing,
What am I
and we'll
talking
find out
about?
whether or not it's going to
You know
air
how you can have a very
shortly.
engaging,
And even if it
complex
doesn't,
dream,
I highly recommend the
and
book or
alarm
the
goes
audio
off,
book
and
to
by the time
anyone.
your feet hit the floor, you're
Anyone.
grasping for it. And it's literally melting before your eyes.
Monte's
That's a
excellent
very
deck all around.
DMT-like presentation.
For
The way a dream melts
psychic
away
and
is the way a
physical
DMT trip
well-being.
melts away at
It's
the
just
same
kind of good to
speed.
know what's going on in the science of it.
Well, over time
Sort of the
and
scientific,
using
or not
tricks,
sort of, but it
you
is the
can
scientific
drag a
validation
certain
of
amount of
intuitive
data
knowledge.
out of it. And
Unfortunately,
what
the
I'll
intuition's
do
been
is
destroyed
I'll describe a DMT trip,
in a great
and
many people.
it's a composite of maybe
Replaced
40
by
of these
advertising
trips,
agency
and
slogans.
then you can see what you
Manufactured
make
by
of it.
Meta.
So this is, I'll just describe it. I'll be
Just kidding.
the
they're not all
graduate
manufactured
student,
by
you
Meta.
be the guy with the clipboard.
It's just what they aspire to.
You're saying to me, so what happened? Okay, here's what happened. I took one takes. Most people can get off in about 3 to 4 hits. Now there's a trick to it. Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor
width
because you really
of
need
this
leather
aura
lungs
layer
for this.
is a bit
The
wider,
great
or a
problem
bit
is
more
that people
than
will
I
cough
anticipated.
or not be
So I'm
able
kind
to
of
hold
debating
it
on how to
in.
do the next layer of
You
the aura.
take 2
What I
hits
might do is use
in a
line work,
situation where your clothes have
instead
been
of another
loosened
solid
and you
layer.
can just flop
Or
backwards,
maybe wait until I do the
when you
shapes
need to. You take
from the
2
hornet
hits.
extending
Now
into the
many
sky
people miss the point
and figure out a way
because
to
after
blend
2
them.
hits,
We'll see.
you feel
We'll see.
completely
But I want to get this
clear.
finished, do the orange
You
in the
feel as
lake,
though
and
your
then cut this
body is
session.
undergoing some strange kind of anesthesia. All the air has been pumped out of the room. This is
Oh,
the
and the
visual
top flap
acuity
pills,
thing
yeah.
I talked about last
That won't
night.
take
The
too long.
colors jump up. The edges sharpen. It's and at that point, people say, "Whoa, wow, it's really coming on strong." And then what you have to do is you have to take one more enormous hit. And this separates the intrepid from the casual, believe me. Because most people, and the facilitator doesn't want to lean on the person. You say, damn it, take the 3rd hit. And say, no, I feel completely weird. Say, I know you feel weird, but take the 3rd hit. Well, if you can coax somebody into that, then what happens is you close your eyes and you see the ordinary warm brown closed eyelid scenario, and then these colors begin racing together, and it forms this mandalic, floral, slowly rotating thing, which I call the chrysanthemum. This is a place in the trip that you want to see as you go by it. The chrysanthemum forms, and you watch it for like 15 seconds. If it doesn't give way, then you didn't do enough. You have to do more. One more hit usually will do it. Well, then what happens is it like physically propels you through this chrysanthemum-like thing, and there's a sound like a saran wrap bread wrapper being crumpled up and thrown away, that crackle. A friend of mine says, this is your radio intellect leaving through the anterior fontanelle at the top of your head. I don't know what it is, but it's something is being... Yeah, right, that's what it is. And then there's this very defined sense of bursting through something, a membrane. And on the other side, and this is now, remember, my experience, on the other side, as you break through, there's a cheer. There's a a whole bunch of entities waiting on the other side. And they, you know that Pink Floyd song, The Gnomes Have Learned a New Way to Say Hooray? Well, it's that place. It's those gnomes. And you burst into this space, and they're saying, how wonderful that you're here. You come so rarely. We're so delighted to see you. And one of the things about DMT that's really puzzling is, in a sense, it doesn't affect your mind. In other words, you don't change. For instance, if you take ketamine, the first thing you notice, the very first thing you notice before the trip hits, is you notice that you no longer are anxious about having taken ketamine. You just sort of, anxiety leaves you. That means it's affecting your mind. It's doing something to the judgmental machinery. DMT doesn't lay a hand on the judgmental machinery. You break through into that space exactly who you were before breaking through. And the usual reaction of most people is something like, you know, you think, God, heartbeat, normal, pulse, normal, everything's normal, yeah, everything's normal, oh God. Because these things are there, and they're hammering at you, and they come forward. They're like jeweled, self-dribbling basketballs. And there are many of them, and they come pounding toward you, and they will stop in front of you and vibrate, but then they do a very disconcerting thing, which is they jump into your body. They jump into your body, and then they jump back out again. And the whole thing is going on in this very high-speed mode, where you're being presented with thousands of details per second, and you can't get a hold on, you say, you know, my God, what's happening? And these things are saying, don't abandon yourself to amazement, which is exactly what you want to do. You just want to go nuts with how crazy this is. They say, don't do that. Don't do that. Pay attention. Pay attention to what we're doing. Well, what are they doing? Well, what they're doing is they're making objects with their voices. They're singing structures into existence. These things are, and what they will do is they'll come toward you, and then, and you have to understand, they don't have arms, so we're kind of downloading this into a lower dimension to even describe it. But what they do is they offer things to you. Say, look at this. Look at this. And as your attention goes toward these objects, you realize that what you're being shown is impossible. It's impossible. It's not simply intricate, beautiful, and hard to manufacture. It's impossible to make these things. The nearest analogy would be to the Fabergé eggs or something like that. But these things are like the toys that are scattered around the nursery inside a UFO or something. Celestial toys. And they are, the toys themselves appear to be somehow alive. The toys themselves can sing other objects into existence. So what's happening is there's just this proliferation of elf gifts. And the elf gifts are moving around, singing, and the whole thing is directed toward, they're saying, do what we are doing. And they're very insistent. They say, do it, do it, do it. And you feel like a bubble. And now this is subjective. I mean, only 5% report this, but it happens to me. You feel like some kind of bubble inside your body that's beginning to move up toward your mouth. And when it comes out, it isn't sound, it's vision. You discover that you can pump stuff out of your mouth by singing. And they're urging you to do this. They say, that's it, keep doing it. And the whole thing is like we're now at minute 4.5 with this stuff. And you speak in a kind of glossolalia. There's a spontaneous outpouring of syntax unaccompanied by what is normally called meaning.
So now I think I'm going to do the
It's sort of,
foreground pedals, foremost pedals, and figure out a different tactic, or perhaps maybe a translucency for the next layer of white pedals. Maybe a line. We'll see. Or I might go back and do it pure white. I'll think on it for a while with that set.
And then after a minute or so of this, the whole thing begins to collapse in on itself. And they literally begin to physically move away from you. And usually their final shot is they actually wave goodbye and they say, "Deja vu, deja vu," which makes no sense at all if you analyze it. So then you come down, and you're now at minute 6 to 7, and you come down, and it's like being more loaded than you've ever been. It's like about a 700 mic acid trip, but you embrace it as totally down. You say, "I'm totally down." I mean, you look like a termite from Arcturus, and the room is decorated in Amish quilts, but I'm completely back. And then, over a minute or a minute and a half or so, the room just comes right back together, and 4 minutes after that, some people can give no account of it whatsoever. They just say, I don't know. It was the weirdest thing that ever happened to me. I can't remember it now. And so that's the basic run-through. Now, a lot of stuff is going on in there. First of all, what are these things? And why do they want you to do this strange activity? And what's so great about it? Well, first of all, who are these things? We can, be good scientists and make a list of the possibilities and then see which seems more likely. They could be a disincarnate race of hyperdimensional dwellers who live in some kind of parallel continuum just over some kind of energy barrier, and they're there all the time. You do have the feeling that they're there all the time, that it's ongoing, that you have just cut into their scene. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that behind all these psychedelics, and especially DMT, that this is not a drug at all, but it is essentially a pay telephone of some sort to aliens, good old National Enquirer type aliens who are using this as a communication domain. Say, we can't land on the White House lawn, that would create panic and hysteria. So let's create a drug, which inside the drug we will be able to deal with people. And I was hoping that John Mack, who's an expert on UFO abductions, would be here this weekend. I expected him, because I think this whole abduction thing is not going to be illuminated until they start giving abductees DMT and saying, "So is this what happened to you? Was it like this, or was it completely different?" Well, so then those are the two possibilities that I sort of dealt with over the first 10 or 15 years of thinking about this. And then recently,
So constantly that experience that people are interpreting as an abduction is just a hyperproduction of an abduction of DMT in the brain.
it could be. What puzzles me is that the abduction thing is so non-psychedelic. It's so cut and dry. And all this anal examination stuff with strange machinery, there's nothing comparable to that, I'm happy to report to you, going on in the DMT thing. But it may be, you see, well, I'd be interested in looking at the possibility that DMT under normal or abnormal conditions could be sequestered in the human brain, and then some unusual stimulus or stress could cause it to suddenly be dumped. And yeah.
What you just described about the colors coming in and the dancing happening, it's been so fascinating. I've completely forgotten about the pain, about it. You've watched it for hours. Well, until I fell asleep. You sort of struck a note, and I was always under a lot of stress.
Alright, flower's starting to come to life. 13 minutes, I don't know if I can make it all the way around in another 13 minutes, though. I'll have to watch out battery.
Yeah, that's an interesting possibility. I also have migraines, or the kind called cluster headaches. And yes, a lot of the nice thing about DMT is that it's painless, but the sense of being split open and of the traveling scatomata, as they call these hallucinations that migraine people see, it's related in some way, yeah. Sure.
The knowledge principle is characterized as called phasing, but its basis is sort of what happens on subatomic level with matter and energy. Turns out there's no fundamental particle. At that level, you have this dance between matter and energy. Energy coalesces into a bit of matter, which then becomes energy. And you can look at this matter-energy relationship as having a wavelength or frequency associated with it. Now, granted, this happens on a subatomic level, but if there's something comparable going on a level at which we seem to exist in physical form, and it seems to me that there has to be something akin to it, that it may be that we as beings are sort of tuned to a frequency range, in this particular form, and that somehow it's possible to shift that or expand it so that what we're actually experiencing is a broader range of frequencies, or sort of a shift in wavelength. And I think some of these experiences can be at least explored, in that context. There's so much that we don't know.
Ain't that the truth?
Of this cosmos that, but we can extrapolate to some degree. At least we can use this to take journeys and explore possibility from what we do know in science, for example. What happens in a subatomic or on quantum? We're going to think the language of these people is something more like sorcerers these days than science. And we do seem to at least believe from the evidence that we see that there is this matter-energy interchange on a very fundamental level. Something that can be like that level. There may be this principle of phasing in which we either shift our tuning or we stay.
Quite a bit of fracture. I'm working over. Keep those
Yeah, I
passages
think that's a very interesting avenue to pursue, this thing about frequency.
But it's
Somebody
working.
told me one of the great things
Slow
about
going.
this job is you hear a
10
lot of
minutes
weird
left on this memory
stories.
segment.
And somebody told me a story recently about, it didn't involve DMT, it
Don't think we
involved
can do that in 10
LSD, but
minutes.
this
We'll get as far
guy,
as
a
we can.
friend of
We'll
his,
probably
took
cut it in
a
another
quite
session.
large dose of LSD, larger than they intended, and they went to a party. And they were so loaded by the time they got to the party that they realized they could not function as partygoers. So they just moved into a corner and sat with their backs to the wall and watched this party rage in front of them. And after about 20 minutes of sitting there, they both simultaneously noticed, it was a dance party, noticed that the music was sounding really strange, and everybody was moving very slowly. And as they watched, the thing came to an absolute halt, and people were just frozen, and there was absolute silence. And at that point, the door at the other end of the room swung open, and an elf entered the room and moved among all these frozen people, and then left by the door he came in. And they both saw this, and they said that they could tell that it was, that the people in the room didn't know it happened, because for them it occupied a microsecond But this thing that was, in Carlos Castaneda, who God knows is not the world's most reliable reporter on these things, nevertheless, there is this thing about stopping the world. So maybe it's something like that there is, as you suggest, a frequency phase. Yeah. This sort of leads into the third possibility having to do with the origin of these things. And in a sense, this is the hardest one to swallow, but in another sense, this is the most conservative, in some crazy notion of conservative, the most conservative explanation, because, because we have no evidence other than the tabloids that this world is being visited by friendly visitors from Zenebel Ganubi or Zeta Reticuli or the Pleiades or anywhere else. I mean, to my mind, the evidence that this is happening is vanishingly small and totally underwhelming. The other possibility that there's some kind of parallel dimension in which these things exist is also somewhat poorly supported. If we're talking about something which thinks, something which can communicate, something which is intelligent, then we should look to ourselves as the source of it, because we are the only intelligent communicating things we know within a certain narrow definition of these things. So that it's occurred to me with greater and greater force, and largely prompted by giving DMT occasionally to Tibetans and Amazonian shamans. And when you say to them, to the shamans in the Amazon, when you say to them, what is happening with this stuff, and what are those little things in there? They say, oh, well, those are ancestor spirits. Didn't you know? Haven't you heard? Shamanism is about doing healing through the intercession of ancestor spirits. Say, ancestor spirits. Let's get this straight. Dead people is what you're talking about, right? These are dead people. And, maybe because I was raised Catholic, I resisted this like grim death. But I'm beginning to think that what you actually break into in that place is something that we might call an ecology of souls. That is it possible to entertain the notion that at death you actually don't just become worm food, but that something survives in some other dimension, and that it has this bizarre character to it, and that this explains their peculiar affection for humanity and their involvement somehow in our fate. Well, this is, to me, fairly mind-bending as a possibility. If what is awaiting us at the end of the 20th century is the erasure of the boundary between the living and the dead, then we've all been too conservative in our projections of what is going on. Yeah. Yes, that there will be some kind of erasure of the boundary between the two. Well, once I had this idea, I mentioned my Jungian and art historical proclivities, and so that means you always look back through tradition and folklore to try and find something analogous to this. Well, there ain't much, but there is one area that seems suggested to me, and that is, as you all know, the Irish are a fairy-haunted race. They're also an intoxication-obsessed race, at least in stereotype. Well, it turns out that you probably all are familiar with the notion of purgatory. Purgatory is the place where you have to spend a lot of time before you get to heaven if you're not bad enough to go to hell. So you put in a few calculiochasms of eternity in purgatory, and then you get let into heaven. Well, I had always assumed that this dogma, I don't know, I hadn't really thought about it, I just sort of assumed it arose with early Christianity. But when I began looking into this, I discovered that the idea of purgatory was invented by St. Patrick. And it was invented specifically to convert the pagan Irish, because the pagan Irish believed in the land of Fae. They believed there was this nearby dimension full of the souls of the dead surrounding us all the time, and that certain people with the gift of second sight could see this. So Patrick just said to them, no, that isn't it. It's purgatory, and was able to push that on them so successfully that a later church council adopted it as general dogma for the church to use in converting the pagan Slavs as well. So it's an idea of a nearby dimension inhabited by disincarnate souls that is apparently very old, but very alien to our tradition. Yeah.
There is another notion of quantum physics. It's going to be a gross oversimplification, but it's kind of related. It has to do with the quantum wave function, which is really kind of a dual wave. It has two parts to it. One part, and they both have a temporal or time-related aspect to it. One part, which is called the ordinary part of the wave, can be seen as a wave propagating forward in time. And the other half of the wave, which is called the complex conjugate, can be seen propagating backward in time from some future state, from some past state, some future state, emitting waves which at some point interact and produce what is perceived or experienced as the present state, which is really a dynamic process in itself. There is no absolute present, because as soon as you get out of the mouth, it's past. But the interesting thing is that what that implies is that what we experience in the present, whatever it may be, is somehow related to some future state and some past state. But it also means that neither future or past are fixed, and that we could sort of align ourselves with different tracks or vectors, and a slightly different vector, slightly skewed, may produce something totally.
Okay. What we got left? Oh shit, 1 minute. Alright, I'm going to reposition the camera to do a little bit of the orange lake glow before I end this session. So we're going to kill this and then do it in a couple minutes. Okay, next take. A little bit of orange on the lake. That makes the petals look much smoother and gets the sunflower on its way. I'm liking it better. So let's get that orange brightened up, and then we'll wrap this session up for the day and go check on Gabor.
That's a few more singularities than a good theory would tolerate, I would think. I mean, what kind of theory is it that hands you back 10 to the 9th singularities, which are exceptions to the theory?
That's true, but a lot of that's based on assumptions that are stretches.
Ain't that the truth?
Again, it gets back to a psychedelic experience. It's this whole lower dimensional language slice thing that we seem to have to operate in order to describe an experience that just does not fit his life. We do our best to do it, and sometimes it comes across being very crude and naive. Sometimes we kind of get close to the mark, but it's difficult to know. The whole notion of black hole singularities is just the present attempt at explaining some experience that is beyond ordinary experience. None of us encounter the black hole forever that we know of.
That's true. It seems to me one of the embarrassments of science is that the Big Bang begins with a singularity. And so then you have this whole vast interlocking schema of rational explanation, except that it begins with a hard swallow. You're asked to believe that the entire cosmos of space and time sprang from a point no larger than a cross-section of a gnat's eyelash. Whatever else one could say about that theory, I think you'd agree it's the limit case for credulity. If you believe that, try to think of something that you would throw up your hands and say, well, I'm not buying that. It absolutely, it's sort of like when you join the Catholic Church, you make a declaration of faith. Well, when you join science, you sort of make this declaration of faith that I do believe that the universe sprang in a single instant from an incredibly tiny, hot, dense dot. Unlikely, but who knows?
as you two were dialoguing, that I was getting this visualization. You have to look at the pond of reality. Not only
Alright, now that's starting to glow nicely. And I get some good detail starting to take hold throughout the composition.
But also from the bubbles coming from below. And to me, the deep space that you're talking about is the air inside the bubble coming from below. And so the dimensional reality of that picture is not a linear time perspective. It's something coming from all directions. It is again a
Okay.
Well, this is why I say that.
So before I wrap this up, I'll take it off the tripod and get a better view of what we've done.
Past, present,
My rag off
cause,
my hand.
effect, all of these things disappear. Now remember I said ayahuasca is a kind of slow release.
And for anyone interested in the background that's going on right now, that is Terrence McKenna's Humble Monkey lecture on my YouTube channel.
Is that the style in the Amazon of taking ayahuasca is people get together.
A scene from Good Night and Good Luck, the Ed Murrow on the
and
cover.
they take it and they sing.
I'm not sure the actor's name actually, but he does a terrific job of Ed Murrow.
They're selling them at the table.
Not that I have
back
ever
there.
seen Ed or know Ed Murrow, but
The
I
songs,
really appreciate that movie.
I mean, there's a
Anyway,
great singing and you hear the people
Good Night and Good Luck, that is.
discussing the song.
That
They don't discuss
wraps it up for the
so
minute.
much music.
That gets a
They
much
discuss
smoother,
much
softer
sculpture and
texture
painting.
across
They
all of the
say
sunflower
to the
petals.
shaman, "I like the
Starts its
parts
aura,
with the gray
and as I was
bars
muttering
and the blue
earlier, I'm not
speckling.
quite sure how
But
I'm
when
going to
you
handle the
brought in
next
the
layer
pink
of those
in
flowers,
combination
petals,
with the beige and
that
white, I thought it was
I would like circling outwards from it. So I think I'm going to do a
You
translucencies,
realize then when you take
maybe a
ayahuasca,
slightly
they
more
see
translucent layer
the
next,
song.
and then a very
And now
faint
this
translucent
is really
layer after
interesting
that,
to me because you
and then
remember
maybe
in the
work
DMT
that
class, they wanted you to
into
use your
our
voice to make objects. Well, then in
bald-faced
the
hornet
ayahuasca
patterning
trance,
there.
You use your voice
That
to
gets
control
the
these
Lake of
colored
Fire
modalities.
a little smoother, a
And,
little more glowy,
The whole thing is done that way. Well,
and
so
these
then what it must
clouds
mean
looking
is
more
that
like clouds,
the neurophysiology
and giving them
of
better
ayahuasca
division
somehow
between each layer.
allows for the ordinary
But that sums it up for the minute. I'm going to go check on Gabor's audiobook and try and get that uploaded, and then set this up, splice them all together, and set this out there too. So have a good day, Earth. Thank you for watching. That's Adam Search broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting contact.
Means that